The events of September 11, 2001 were a tragic event, not just for Americans, but for everyone. It wasn't just Americans who died in the attack. People from over 20 different countries worked in those buildings, and it was essentially an attack on our shared culture and values, on our ability to and willingness to live and work side by side with people of all cultures and all beliefs. But what is almost more saddening is that the people who would sully and diminish the suffering of those people involved by creating wild speculation about how it happened, why it happened, and in some cases even if it happened. This is the second of a two-part series about 9/11. The first video was a retelling of the destruction of the World Trade Center complex, and you can watch it by clicking the link in the description below. I decided to split the video into two parts because it felt a bit disrespectful to me to discuss wild conspiracy theories in the same video in which I'm trying to tell the story of 3,000 victims. Now, no video series about 9/11 would be complete without discussing the many theories surrounding the incident. There's a massive amount of pretty wild and out there conspiracy theories, and I'm not going to be discussing all of them, just the most prominent. There is a pretty excellent 3-hour iceberg 9/11 video, which I will link in the description for those people whose pet theories I don't discuss. The YouTuber Ramtro Studios does a pretty unbiased job of discussing all of them. And I do mean all of them, even like the fringe, crazy 4chan conspiracies. He discusses all of them. So if I don't talk about the theory that you're interested in, watch his iceberg video. I guarantee you he does. And he also follows up that video with another video discussing the critiques of the first video that people left in the comment section of it, which personally I think gives him quite a lot of credibility, and I think makes him a lot more of a trustworthy source because he's willing to be open and unbiased, and he's also willing to take on criticism. Side note, Ramtro, if by any chance you ever see this video, you discuss the lol Superman theory in your video and assert that there is no video of jumpers hitting the floor in the plaza, and said that it was likely not true and a hoax. There is, however, a video depicting exactly that. I've seen it, and I downloaded it as part of my research and media collection for my first video. I didn't include it in that video, obviously, because that's genuinely disturbing, unnecessary, and 100% disrespectful. But this is just a minor correction for you. Those 4chan lurkers, they were actually right about this. So, in the description box below, you'll find a link to all of the resources which I've used to investigate the claims being made. All are free and available to access from anywhere on Earth, as far as I know. If you think I'm wrong about anything, feel free to check my sources and send me an email to discuss it with me. Quick disclaimer. If you came here to get your beliefs confirmed, I'm probably not going to be doing that. What I found is when investigating conspiracies, including this one, is that the closer you look at them, the less sexy and fun they actually are. I prefer to hold to two maxims when looking at conspiracy theories, and that's the two famous razors. No, not those razors. These ones. Occam's razor, which states that the simplest answer is often the correct answer, and Hanlon's razor, which is to never attribute to malice what is more easily explained by incompetence. The second one's kind of important, so put it in your brain box. This theory is actually a couple of theories all bundled together. And I'm going to do the same. I'm going to talk about them bunched together since they're all related. The claims that there is no chance that two planes could bring down the hulking towers seems to stem from a couple of things. Number one, the fact that the towers were designed to withstand hurricanes and even a direct commercial jet crash. Number two, jet fuel can't burn hot enough to melt steel. Number three, the clean cuts on the steel beams and the presence of 1,3-diphenylpropane at ground zero proves the use of thermite and hence a controlled demolition. Number four, no steel skyscraper building has ever fallen due to fire damage alone. People say this one mostly in reference to Building 7, but we'll get to that too. It is true that the Japanese architect who designed the buildings back in the 1960s had to consider a few different stress factors when he drew up the plans. Because of their immense height, they had to be able to resist very high winds at the point furthest away from the ground, where the force of lateral stress would be the strongest. This is one of the reasons that reinforced steel concrete was chosen for the building's skeleton, as steel can absorb a lot of stress and return to its original shape again. It's pretty common for skyscrapers to use reinforced concrete. Since it was the beginning of the commercial jet age, he also built it to withstand a head-on crash with a Boeing 707, the biggest jet of the time. However, the towers were hit by 767s, not 707s, and you can see from this size comparison that a 767 is almost twice as big and heavy, and crucially, they hold significantly more fuel than a 707, and fuel is a key factor in all of this. So when the planes crashed through the perimeter structure, this tore off the wings, which spilled fuel everywhere since planes store fuel in the wings. The fuselage crashed through the offices and into the central supports, which is also where the elevators and lobbies were located. This sent burning jet fuel down the elevator shafts and into multiple elevator lobbies. This is evidenced by the reports of hundreds of people being covered in burning jet fuel while waiting in those elevator lobbies. It's also evidenced during the Naudet brothers documentary when Jules Naudet follows the fire chief into the building and they immediately encounter people burning alive in the ground floor lobby. This fuel pathway down the elevator shafts helped to spread the fire to multiple floors and also into the central structure. So the fuel reached all the way down to the ground lobby in addition to all of the sky lobbies above. Jet fuel doesn't burn hot enough to melt steel. This is true. Steel melts at around 1500 degrees centigrade. Sorry Americans, I ain't using your freedom units. And jet fuel only burns at about 1000 degrees. But what conspiracy theorists often leave out of the discussion is that jet fuel didn't need to burn hot enough to melt the steel. While steel doesn't melt until 1500 degrees, it does lose 90% of its structural strength at 1000 degrees and becomes very weak and easy to bend and snap. To demonstrate this, we're going to watch this blacksmith do it with his pinky finger.
This is a piece of half-inch thick steel, A36 structural steel designed for structures. This is a 250-pound anvil. I'm going to put this steel in the back of this anvil and I'm going to lift this 250-pound anvil with this bar of steel. Do you see how the structural steel is supporting this anvil? Okay, there. Now, in my furnace, I have an identical piece of half-inch bar of steel, just like this. And it's going to be around 1800 degrees, just 300 more than jet fuel when it comes out. And I want you to see something very interesting. Go into the forge. It's very hot, but not melted. Obviously, it is not melted. I put this in the anvil. Now watch this. I'm going to take my pinky finger, half-inch solid steel. Check it out. It's a freaking noodle.
And the fire did burn at that temperature, and this caused the steel trusses to lose the strength and sag, which then pulled the wall structures inwards, causing the top floor to lose all of its vertical stress resistance. And the upper floors then quickly dropped onto the lower portion, and the force of the top 17 floors hitting the 93rd floor, which had already been weakened by the jet fuel down the elevator shafts, caused the exact same thing to happen there, which then dropped all of that mass on the next floor, causing the same thing to happen over and over and over until the towers collapsed. I think when people talk about how pancaking doesn't happen with steel skyscraper buildings, they're talking about traditional skyscraper construction. In the Empire State Building, for example, this actually probably wouldn't happen because it had steel support beams throughout the entire structure, giving it much more vertical stress resistance and far fewer points of failure. The design of the World Trade Center gave it this unique weakness and kind of made it inevitable that it would happen in an event such as this. Thermite. Okay, So when people talk about cleanly cut steel, they're usually referencing this photo, which I find pretty funny because my very first reaction to seeing this photo was that clearly rescue and cleanup services had cut the beams to stabilize debris and reduce the risk of further injury while rescuing people. And that's why all the cuts are coincidentally in all the areas that rescue services were working. After some digging around, I found a photo which pretty much confirms this. This aerial photo of the same area at an earlier time doesn't show the beams as, neatly cut, but rather bent and twisted. And the footage from the many rescue videos, including the Norday Brothers documentary, also shows the beams as being twisted and bent before they were cut by rescue services. The orange markings on the beams are also not there. Now this is very likely a removal mark to show which beams and where to cut, that the rescue services left so that the engineers that would cut the beams would know to make the area search area safer. Oh yeah. What about the 1,3-diphenylpropane? This actually did confuse me a little bit at first. Now, I didn't know very much about thermite, but I did know that it was basically aluminium iron oxide, right? So I had to learn a little bit about why this might be evidence of thermite use. And that's genuinely confusing because thermite is a non-organic compound, so quite why the presence of a complex organic compound like 1,3-diphenylpropane would be evidence of the use of a very messy inorganic reaction like burning thermite is a complete mystery to me. However, I do know where this theory came from, and it seems like someone, possibly even me, but probably not, doesn't really understand chemistry and misread the study where this information came from. This theory comes from a study conducted by a secret group of rogue investigators who just want the truth to be released and get out there. Someone operating outside of the law and the establishment. It's the EPA. That's right, this theory stems from a fucking EPA report. A report in which the EPA measured air samples at ground zero after the towers collapsed and found 1,3-diphenylpropane in those samples. Now the report says two things, one directly after another, and I'm just going to directly quote it, okay? In addition, the compound 1,3-diphenylpropane was observed, and to our knowledge, this species has not previously been reported from ambient sampling. Now what this means is that it's something that pretty much all big cities do. They collect air samples at various points in the year to monitor things like pollution and stuff like that, okay? So what the EPA did was they compared air samples from the day after the towers collapsed to all the samples before the towers collapsed and realized that 1,3-diphenylpropane had never been reported or detected in any previous ambient sampling, right? Now this seems to suggest that it was never present before, and conspiracy theorists have extrapolated that this obviously is a byproduct of burning thermite. Again, I'm not even entirely sure that that's possible, as I couldn't find any studies or experiments to prove that that reaction happens. So the fact that that compound wasn't present ever before but is present the next day sounds pretty convincing, right? Well, that is until you read the very next sentence in the report. Again, quoting, "It has been associated with polystyrene and other plastics, which are in abundance at the World Trade Center site." So, the report from which theorists have taken this information immediately states that it's a byproduct of burning plastics. You know what? Fuck it, I've changed my mind. That's not someone misunderstanding the report. That's someone selectively cherry picking from it. They didn't. On the NIST selection of resources, which I linked below, there are not just photos of the collected steel, but videos also. And there are also 8 pretty exhaustive reports on all of the structural steel found at the site too. Anyone claiming the steel was recycled before it could be analysed has never read any of these reports, because I have, and they analysed it extensively. Now people also mentioned that the steel was sold to China, and they sort of try to imply that this was done like hush hush and super quick to get all the steel out so it couldn't be analyzed. It is true the steel was sold to China, but it wasn't done quickly or secretly. There's a very obvious paper trail. That's how we know. Most of the steel was sold to China, but that was because no American companies were interested in taking the steel because of the fact that it might look like they were attempting to capitalize on the death of 3,000 people. The Chinese just didn't give a shit about that. Really? This is another of the issues that's so unbelievably obvious that I'm surprised anybody ever raises it. It's just physics. Air and dust from the damage inside the floor was compressed and expressed outwards as the vertical space was narrowed by the upper floor collapsing onto a lower floor. It's the exact same effect as if you had flour on your hands and did that. If you go to YouTube and search top 20 controlled demolitions. Actually, you can do this right now. Pause the video, open up a new tab, and type in top 20 controlled demolitions, okay? What you won't find is a video of 20 different buildings all falling in the exact same way. You'll find 20 different buildings all falling differently. Even the towers and Building 7 themselves didn't fall perfectly down. The South Tower collapsed mostly down and inwards due to the damage being more extensive and further down the structure, while the North Tower collapsed and fell at a slight angle. That's how Building 7 became damaged. The building architect actually designed the buildings as such that had the planes hit a little bit higher, they might not have even collapsed at all. The reason the two buildings didn't fall straight down it's due to how the planes damaged them. So when the plane hit the South Tower, it hit lower between floors 77 and 85 and took out a large section of the perimeter columns, whilst also damaging a third of the central columns as well. This destroyed 2 out of the 3 stairwells and created a pathway for jet fuel to fall down the elevator shaft, create fires on lower floors, and fire weaken the central structure. Now, when the support trusses on the affected floors gave way, this collapsed all of the floors on top of the heat-weakened lower floors. And that dropped hundreds of thousands of tons of vertical weight onto lower levels, which were only designed to support the weight of one individual level. Hence, the downward pancaking of the building. In the North Tower, the plane hit further up at floor 93 to 99, and this actually destroyed all 3 stairwells, and just like the South Tower, also sent burning jet fuel down the elevator shaft. The fact that the crash was higher up in the tower meant that when floor 93 failed structurally, there was a lot less weight collapsing onto the lower floors and thus less vertical force. Still more than enough to cause failure in the floors below, but it caused the force to change direction slightly, which is why the North Tower fell differently, and also why it collapsed second despite being hit first. In reality, neither tower fell straight down like a controlled demolition, and actually controlled demolitions rarely fall straight down either. However, controlled demolitions do follow the same principle of physics, which is that vertical load resistance is destroyed at the lower levels, and then they rely on vertical load force to destroy the rest of the building by falling down. Building 7 was largely unaffected, save for some small fires due to falling flaming debris from the North Tower. But after the collapse of the North Tower, its falling debris damaged Building 7 as it fell, causing mostly flammable offices to ignite. The falling debris from the North Tower did also cause structural damage to Building 7, but that didn't cause the collapse of Building 7. Now, the fires in Building 7 burned for hours, actually all day long, due to the fact that the fire suppression system had no water supply because it had been cut off when the 2 towers collapsed. Firemen didn't bother prioritizing the fires in Building 7 because there were no people inside it. The 4,000 people working there on that day had all been evacuated when the first towers had been hit. So with no possible loss of life, Fire and Rescue just focused their efforts for the day on helping people from the 2 towers instead of putting out fires in an empty building. True, there was no jet fuel, but this actually supports the fire collapse hypothesis. It doesn't refute it. I've seen a lot of people argue about Building 7, though not really sure why. Common themes seem to be If fire damaged, why did smaller building take longer to collapse than the two towers? Well, it was a lower temperature fire, as it did not have the same flammable mass and wasn't accelerated by burning jet fuel. Because of that, it meant that the steel lost less of its structural integrity and it took longer to reach the point of failure. Now, people also say that no steel building has ever collapsed that way due to fire alone. Well, they better tell that to Edificio Wilton Paes de Almeida, the Plasco building, and Windsor Tower, all of which collapsed the same way due to fires, and all of which were steel skyscraper buildings. Actually, he often gets misquoted here. What he really said was this.
According to some estimates, we cannot track $2.3 trillion in transactions.
And he wasn't talking about a discovery made that day either. He was talking about reports from the year 2000, which were related to the fiscal year of 1999. He wasn't making a point about theft of money, but rather that the Pentagon accounting systems were so disconnected and outdated that $2.3 trillion couldn't be properly tracked due to the entries being duplicated when they were transferred from one ancient decrepit system to another one and not being corrected. There was never an accusation that money was missing.
The technology revolution has transformed organizations across the private sector. But not ours, not fully, not yet. We are, as they say, tangled in our anchor chain. Our financial systems are decades old. According to some estimates, we cannot track $2.3 trillion in transactions. We cannot share information from floor to floor in this building because it's stored on dozens of different technological systems that are inaccessible or incompatible.
It's why he specifically used the word tracked and not missing. It was a ledger issue, not one of missing money. Side note, the Pentagon did indeed update its accounting systems. The switchover is scheduled to take place in 2028, and the process only started in 1990. So you can understand why Rumsfeld was making such a big deal out of the matter, because the process had already been going on for over a fucking decade and was resulting in extremely low accuracy records. Okay, come closer. Firstly, when has the USA ever needed permission to invade anyone? It literally does it for fun under multiple presidents, including the current one. But let's put that aside for a moment and discuss this as if America does need permission to do stuff. Here is where it gets a bit murky. You see, people are confusing correlation with causation or getting the causality backwards. But we'll get to that in a second. The reason why big government conspiracies are so difficult for a rational person to believe actually has almost nothing to do with the available evidence. It's down to one simple fact. In order for it to be true that the government planned and orchestrated this huge event involving hundreds, maybe thousands of people across multiple domestic and international agencies and keep their involvement a complete secret, we also have to believe that the government is a slick, well-oiled machine filled with highly capable operators who can execute this. Now, what I find odd is that conspiracy theorists who believe in this kind of thing also tend to be the same kind of people who argue the government is super inefficient and cannot be trusted with anything, not even with something simple like tax money. So, if you believe that the government is slick enough to execute this plan, you should also believe they're extremely capable of running the country effectively. And if you don't believe that they can run the country effectively, then how in the fuck can you believe that they can execute a plan of this complexity and magnitude without getting caught? Now, that's speaking generally. I'm willing to wager that every single person watching this, myself included, believes the government is largely a bureaucratic mess which constantly fucks up. In this particular example, it wasn't like a super slick, highly efficient politician like Obama or Reagan. It was this guy.
I call upon all nations to do everything they can to stop these terrorist killers. Thank you. Now watch this drive.
You want me to believe this guy?
We got an issue in America. Too many good docs are getting out of business. Too many OBGYNs aren't able to practice their love with women all across this country.
This guy.
Our enemies are innovative and resourceful, and so are we. They never stop thinking about new ways to harm our country and our people, and neither do we.
Can mastermind the whole thing. You want me to believe this guy is a slick operator who can put all these pieces on the board in advance and then execute an international conspiracy? But, I hear you say. Dick Cheney is the type of guy who could or would do this. Yeah, correct. He definitely was. And while I can't confirm this for sure, plenty of people who operate in the political sphere in the USA seem to think that Dick and George had an unwritten agreement, that George would enjoy being the public face of the presidency and Dick would revel in the actual authority of the presidency and George would just rubber stamp whatever Dick said. Again, this is kind of a conspiracy in itself, so it might not even be true, but even non-conspiracy theorists widely agree that Dick was the most powerful VP in history. This is true, but the bin Laden family is not Osama bin Laden. Actually, they had largely disowned Osama bin Laden by that point because they considered him to be, get this, a religious extremist. Fun fact, Osama himself was actually pro-America when they were funding the Afghani forces against the Soviet Union. He would later swap his opinion thanks to Bush Sr. sending troops into Iraq during their defense of Kuwait. Not because he disagreed with defending Kuwait, but because the Saudi royal family rejected his offer of using his legion of followers to defend the Saudi border, a job that would eventually be given to US Special Forces instead. That would lead him to his infamous declaration of jihad in 1996. I think it's fair to say that he was a bit of a sore loser and didn't take rejection very well. So, while it does look bad that Bush helped the bin Ladens escape during the airspace shutdown following the attack, they were his dad's business partners, so you would expect them to pull strings, right? Like if his dad was business partners with the president of Barclays Bank, for example, you'd probably see the same thing happen and not a single person would bat an eyelid about it. It's not really connected to Osama at all, because again, they had publicly disowned him in 1994 and stripped him of his $7 million annual family stipend. So when W decided to help out the bin Laden family to get out the country, it had no relation to the attacks at all, aside from the fact that the family shares a name with him. W was likely just doing a favor for his dad. Now, Michael Moore makes a big point about this in Fahrenheit 9/11, but he's connecting dots which very likely aren't there. In fact, most of that documentary plays like a conspiracy theory video. Now, in the 90s, during the first Bush invasion, Cheney was an outspoken opponent of removing Saddam, as he felt that it would lead to instability in the region. Smart man. Around 1997 or so, Dick started to favor the removal of Saddam and was in favor of invading Iraq, even joining some weird thing called PNAC, which was a weird group pushing for the USA to start acting like an empire again. You know what else happened around the same time that he was pushing for an invasion of Iraq? He became the CEO of an oil company called Halliburton, whose subsidiary, KBR, were later contracted by the US government under his watch to work with Iraqi oil fields. They were also accused of overcharging by $60 million. No. Remember Occam's razor. Which of these two is more likely? That Dick Cheney spent a decade campaigning to become vice president under a gullible idiot president so that he could orchestrate an attack which would then enrich his former oil company? Or that an opportunity presented itself and he took it? If you said the first, you've got genuine problems because you don't realize how insanely difficult that would actually be. Was it an inside job? No. Dick had been looking for a way to engineer what he wanted, and this was it. It's like the two things seem like they're dependent on each other, but they're actually not. It's like if someone steals a wallet and drops the wallet on the floor and I find the wallet and I take the money out of the wallet, I did not steal the wallet, but I did capitalize on the wallet being stolen. It's the same thing. And it's still a shitty thing to do, but if you want to know who did 9/11, it was that bearded dude who admitted to doing it. This is true. The FBI did warn the government like multiple times in the run-up to the event, But whether this proves an inside job is really up to you, and the two ways to read it are, number one, the government are incompetent and just failed to give it the due attention that they should have. Number two, the government intentionally ignored it to facilitate a grand plot. It's up to you how you interpret it, but just remember Hanlon's razor. Never attribute to malice what can more easily be explained by incompetence. And I think this counts double when you're talking about governments or wealthy CEOs. Let's deal with the last part first, since it's the easiest. Plenty of Jews died in the towers and the planes. Actually, the first known death was a former IDF member called Daniel Lewin on flight UA-93. There are also 5 confirmed Israeli citizens in the tower collapse and an estimated 200 to 400 or so deaths from people who followed the Jewish faith. Now, you're probably curious why I said 200 to 400 and not a more specific number. Well, that's because New York City doesn't track individual people's faiths. Like they track those demographics, but not for individuals. The information that we do have comes from independent researchers and historians actually doing the research to try and check on people's faith. The Dancing Israelis video is in relation to a video of 5 Israeli men high-fiving each other while taking photos of the towers in the background after they were attacked. This is seen by theorists to be irrefutable proof that Israel did it, or at the very least they approved of it. Now there's no denying that them high-fiving is both strange and in extremely poor taste as well. But like I said before, there were Israelis in the towers, so celebrating their deaths would be a bit strange, no? Just as a quick side note, I had a look around for photos and images. Actually, I was looking for the video of the Dancing Israelis. I'm not convinced that any of the conspiracy theorists who tout this theory have actually seen the Dancing Israelis video, because I went looking for it. I can't find it. If anybody does have access to it and they want to send it to me, I'll happily update my opinion on this. But anyway, even if I did see the Dancing Israelis video, in the process of looking for it, I found these, which is a collection of Americans taking photos, smiling, looking happy, in front of the 2 towers as they burned. Are these people also part of the huge Israeli plot to take down the Twin Towers? I'm guessing you're going to say no, because you'd have to be genuinely insane to think that. But I guess what we're learning from the fact that I found these pictures is that actually a lot of people didn't really understand the magnitude of what was happening that day. And they took photos of what they just felt like was a significant world event without realizing that the towers were actually going to come down. They just thought that they'd put the fires out and everything would be fine, like when the towers got bombed. So while it is in incredibly poor taste to take these kinds of photos, smiling or high-fiving or even dancing, it isn't actually evidence of anything. It's just evidence of people taking a photo. As for who these people were, well, theorists believe that they were Mossad agents. What a couple of Mossad agents would be doing in New Jersey randomly on this random day of the week is beyond me. There's no reason for them to be there. What would they be doing? What would an official Israeli Secret Service agent be doing in New Jersey for no reason? The FBI did detain these guys for 70 days or so and then released them. And the FBI then later reported that the men were likely working illegally in the USA, but by the point the report had been filed, the men had already left the country. Ramcho Studios goes into this in much more detail in his Iceberg video. If you want to hear more, I'd suggest watching it. So, generally speaking, my opinion, based on the information that I've read, seen and heard, is that it was not an inside job planned by the government, largely because the government is way too incompetent to do it. It was just some power-hungry politicians seizing an opportunity to reshape national policy with little to no resistance. The towers were not a controlled demolition, nor was Building 7, and everything which is in the reports is not just plausible, it's the simplest explanation for what happened. I do think the circumstances surrounding the 5 Israelis is super fucking strange and suspect. Were they involved in the bringing down of the towers? There's no evidence of it, so I have to say no, because there's no evidence beyond conjecture to suggest that they were ever involved in the destruction of the towers. I told you, the closer you look at a conspiracy, the less interesting and sexy they are, which is probably why most hardcore conspiracy theorists don't read the actual associated materials very often, because if they do, they would lose interest. And no matter what your opinion is, we can both agree that a conspiracy theory is way more exciting and interesting to discuss and consider than the actual boring facts.